welcome back to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and we're thrilled to welcome back all of our members after a brief break in our weekly programming schedule while we gear up toward our Cannabis Business Cyber Summit that's kicking off in just 2 weeks. We hope you all have had a great start to your fall and are as excited as we are for this very special Election 2020 focused edition of our monthly members only Fireside Chat with NCIA's Government Relations Team series today. If you are one of the folks that just joined us, do be aware that we'll be conducting Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. So post any of those questions that might be coming to your head to the board by pressing that Q&A button along the bottom toolbar in Zoom, and stop on into the Q&A area throughout the session, even if you don't have anything to contribute yourself, and personally review those submissions. If anything catches your eye as contributing toward the conversation, give that question an upvote and you'll send it up to the top of the feed for our panelists to consider. Now, let's get this show on the road. In this month's Fireside Chat, our government relations team, Mike and Michelle, are joined by representatives from Smart and Safe Arizona, Marijuana Policy Project, and 1906 New Highs to discuss each of the adult use and medical cannabis ballot initiatives up for consideration next week, their possible outcomes, and how it will affect federal policy priorities. Mike and Michelle have assembled an all-star panel of experts, so I don't want to take the mic for any longer than needed. Thank you as always to our NCIA members for joining us this afternoon, and special mention to the Cannabis Advisory Group for sponsoring today's session. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled Fireside Chats with NCIA's Government Relations Team, spotlighting state ballot initiatives, being moderated by Michelle Rudder and Michael Correa. You all can take it away from here.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Welcome, everyone. You know, as a policy geek, I get excited around this time of year, just for elections in general. But we all know, you know, it's an important election, House, Senate, President. But what's really important, what we're really here to talk about are the cannabis ballot initiatives that are going on around the country. As a cannabis lobbyist in DC, my job becomes a lot easier when I go into a congressional office and there is some form of cannabis legalization in their state. Some members of Congress, you know, you see this in California, it's been legal for many years, but you have a senator like Dianne Feinstein who doesn't really care about this issue and has been opposed to it. You have the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy from California, doesn't really care about this issue. But why is it important? It doesn't mean they're going to change. It means people in that state are more willing to stand up and lobby and be a voice for the issue, which makes my job a lot harder because it raises the profile about this issue. Traditionally, you know, cannabis tends to be in blue states, and what we're seeing this year, they're tending to be in some purple states and actually in some red states. So that's going to be really important. And so we have some wonderful guests today. I'm not into reading bios for everyone. We all know who everyone is. There's no reason to go through that because what we want to go through is, you know, what they actually have to say. One, we have Stacey Pearson from Smart and Safe Arizona. Welcome. We have Matt Schweik from Marijuana Policy Project. Nice seeing you again, Matt. And then Jackie Cornell with the Cannabis Advisory Group working on some stuff in New Jersey. Each of you, if you want to turn your videos on, you know, I just want to say this for people who don't know and people who do know, MPP has been there from the beginning. You know, basically cannabis legalization would not have happened going back years ago if it wasn't for MPP working at the state level to get some of these states. You go through the list, whether it's Colorado, whether it's Washington State, whether it's Oregon, Maine, California, other states, to raise this issue up. It was MPP that was there before anyone else working on this. Now some of these states have other funders, stuff takes on, it goes on organically. But I just want to say, Matt, you've been there for so many years. You've been like a true champion working on these issues. You've made my life a lot easier by bringing more states on. And so I just wanted to give you some extra props with what you're doing first. But I would just love, you know, Matt, if you want to talk, you know, if we want to just start getting into states, Matt, if you want to talk about like Montana, you know, the initiatives, what's going on in Montana?
Sure, Mike, and thank you for the great introduction, and thanks to the NCIA for hosting this. And yes, this cycle, I'm very focused on Montana and South Dakota. I was also working a lot on Nebraska until the Supreme Court kicked us off the ballot. In Montana, the challenge is we have two initiatives. We have to pass two initiatives for a single policy goal. We have to pass CI 118, which is a constitutional initiative, and I 190. And 118 simply allows state law to set the minimum age at 21, and 190 contains the actual legalization policy. It is a bit confusing because when voters look at their ballot, they don't see the number 21 when they're looking at CI 118. So we've had to do a lot of education to explain to voters that it takes 2 votes to legalize marijuana in Montana. And we had a difficult and very challenging signature drive that we were able to overcome in the midst of the pandemic. So it's been an exciting campaign, and we're feeling good heading into Election Day.
Sorry about that, had the mute button on. Appreciate that. Stacy, you're out in Arizona. I see the sun going on behind you. I'm sort of jealous, wish I was out there. Would love to hear sort of a little, background on what you've been working on, how long you've been doing it, what's going on in Arizona.
Yeah, the weather finally changed in Arizona. So
it's below 110?
It is finally not 110, despite having more than half the year over 100 degrees, which was made signature gathering really exciting when it was 118 in the middle of a pandemic. That was awesome. Hope to never repeat that again. But I've been working with the campaign since early 2019 when the policy was being developed, and we were trying to correct the mistakes in the 2016 legalization initiative that failed in Arizona. So we filed in Labor Day, right around Labor Day of 2019, started gathering signatures. We're in really good shape going into the pandemic, but then had to get out the other side and win an election. And so right now we're obviously 6 days out. Our numbers are getting stronger by the day, and things are looking good for us here.
Wonderful, appreciate that. And Jackie, just so our viewers know, is a teacher on the side, professor. You had to leave your class early. You're on the East Coast, so welcome on the East Coast. Would love to hear sort of what you're working on, a little quick background.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this and calling attention to everything that's going on. I mean, we're in that final stretch. So I work for 1906 during the day, but then have also worked with Jackie Ferrero to co-found the Cannabis Advisory Group. And so a lot of our focus is on the sort of mid-Atlantic Northeast states. And right now, all eyes are on New Jersey. So the ballot questions in the state of New Jersey are all on the back of the ballot. Because of the pandemic, New Jersey is an entirely vote by mail state this year. And so we're up against kind of 2 hurdles, is the sort of just learning curve of voting by mail, and then also turning the page, which has been the hashtag for the campaign, to both turn the page on failed cannabis policies, but also physically turn the page over and make sure to vote, yes on our question. There's some other questions on the ballot. So our big thing has really not been on the persuasion of opinion, but just sort of the mechanics of getting this right. Polling is really strong here. We've got to make sure that everybody who agrees with this actually does what they need to do to vote the correct way on these paper ballots.
It's so interesting to see how these ballot initiative states, it really highlights, I feel like, how different each state is in terms of the voting process. You know what I mean? You have Pennsylvania, we've all heard, there's 2 envelopes, you got to put stuff in. I'm going to talk about Mississippi in a little bit and how you have to vote for the ballot initiative there. You have to say that you intend to vote yes on one of the initiatives, and that's before you even vote on them. So really commend all of you for not only doing all of this difficult campaign work in general, but then to throw a pandemic into it, I really just have to commend you all. So Matt, I want to come back to you a little bit. We'll come full circle since you already started with Montana. Tell our listeners today, are there any highlights that we should know about with the Montana initiative? Is there anything special about it other than, we're going to legalize adult use cannabis? And then can you tell us, do both of the initiatives have to pass in order for adult use cannabis to be legal, or is it possible for I-190 to pass but not CI-118?
Sure. In terms of the details of the initiative, there's nothing that sticks out. We wanted to draft an initiative that was in line with best practices from other states. We did build it on the existing medical marijuana law, and there's some advantages for existing operators, as you almost always see in these initiatives. a 1-year head start on the licensing process. No changes whatsoever to the medical marijuana policy. We actually wanted to eliminate the medical marijuana tax, but we were told that we couldn't do the single subject drafting rules in Montana. There's an expungement provision that provides a pathway to expungement. So we're excited to have that in an initiative in a state that's not necessarily liberal. And in terms of passing both, we really want to pass both initiatives. That would definitively ensure the 21 age limit. If only one of them passes, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it legally. But for now, we're just going to move forward as though we're going to pass both these initiatives on election day. And if something else happens, we'll respond to that at that time.
Hey, Matt, quick question. Is there anything built in where there's an opt-out provision with the locals? Because I know in California, that was one of the issues. I'm just curious in Montana if they have that.
There's a degree of local control for cities and towns in Montana, different from South Dakota, but yes, there's a degree of local control built into the initiative.
I think that's always important. I know that Mike and I, when we talk to a lot of members of Congress, that's a big issue that we make sure that we underscore with certain offices at the very least, that there is a level of local control in so many places, and that is really helpful. I know that can be difficult in other localities, like I'm thinking of California. I know that that's posed some headaches to say the very least there, but that's good to know. So Stacey, let's go over to you. Kind of the same question. Would love to know about Arizona's initiative. What do we need to know other than it's going to legalize adult use cannabis? What stands out? And then the other question I wanted to ask you is about what's changed from 2016 to now. You know, back in 2016, we had a number of states. I think, what was it back then? I think we had 9 states with varying ballot initiatives. Arizona was one of them. Arizonans went to the polls for adult use cannabis in 2016, and it just narrowly, just by the tiniest margin, lost. So I'm just curious about whether it was just so slim of a margin that we felt like, this was going to be the year, or what's changed. So tell us what's going on in Arizona.
So in 2016, the drafters of that language didn't meet with folks they assumed were going to be opponents. In particular, the Chamber of Commerce in Arizona, which has a very outsized influence in policy in this conservative state, or a state that remains conservative, at least this week. So when we started drafting the policy, we went through, and this sounds extraordinarily primitive, but we went through the ballot arguments against the initiative in 2016 and started there, and just started setting up meetings with folks, asking what we needed to do in the language to address their concerns, to ensure that they weren't going to fundraise and oppose in the same way they did in 16. The Chamber of Commerce was simple. They just wanted assurances. Their board, particularly the utility companies, wanted assurances that they could maintain a drug-free workplace. And I think everyone agrees that there are certain professions that being drug-free and alcohol-free and prescription medication-free is probably key, and folks working on electric lines are right up there. And so we were explicitly clear in the policy in 2020, and the one that voters are voting on Tuesday, that they could maintain drug and alcohol-free workplaces. In terms of the other additions, Arizona has the 5th highest incarceration rate in the country. We are long overdue for criminal justice reform. We are the only state in the nation where first-time minor marijuana possession remains a felony. And so we have 200,000 people eligible for expungement under the initiative that voters will be deciding on. And it's what I'm most excited about. And it was one that we were able to work with the law enforcement community to ensure that they understood what we were trying to do, that once folks paid their fines, did their time, we acknowledge it was illegal under current standards. If someone was arrested or convicted 10 years ago or 5 years ago, they have the opportunity to get back on a level playing field. And so we, in large part, neutralized law enforcement opposition, which was, this is a state where Sheriff Joe was infamous for his torturous tent prisons. So for us to work with law enforcement on that front and ensure that they were comfortable with the policy, I think was a major win. And so all 3 of the major police unions in Arizona are neutral on the initiative, which is a win in and of itself. And then in large part, we we avoided some of the mistakes that the folks in 2016 made in underestimating opposition and underestimating where the voters stood. And we went out with a very strong informational campaign out of the gate when we were gathering signatures saying, hey, this is good for Arizona. It's going to save you money. And ultimately, what we're asking voters in Arizona to decide is, do you want this tax tested and regulated or sold as it currently is? Option C, make marijuana disappear, is not an option. And so, even in conservative suburbs in Phoenix, people can understand that.
I'd like to just note that I ran the Arizona 2016 campaign. And it's by no means a perfect campaign, but it is worth recognizing the increased level of support across the country in every single state, including Arizona, over the past 4 years. And I am very happy that this campaign is on path to win, but I'd be remiss as a representative of that 2016 effort if I didn't point out that the political terrain was much tougher 4 years ago in many of these states.
Yeah, and I mean no disrespect on that, Matt. It was an entirely different landscape in Arizona, and it helps that the Chamber of Commerce is extraordinarily busy trying to defeat education funding right now. So,
and I was just going to throw in for both of you. I think it lost by 60,000 votes. I think that's what the number was. And the opioid company that produced fentanyl airdropped like 500,000 to go negative at the end. Go figure, the drug that's just killing so many thousands of people was somehow going negative on cannabis. You're not going to have some of those elements. At the same time, you're going to have 4 more years of data from neighboring states and other states that change public opinion. So just wanted to put it out there.
Well, and the largest funders, I mean, Bruce Halley with Discount Tire has passed away. I mean, Matt's nightmarish opponents, one's dead, 2 are in jail. One is busy with the pandemic in his own casino operations. And so we certainly had a much different landscape.
Yeah,
I think you guys should have done a campaign ad that was like, oppose marijuana, 2 in jail, 1 dead.
Yeah, that helps.
Sells his casinos and just moves out of the country and we don't have to deal with them anymore. Hey, Jackie, I would love to talk about New Jersey. So the governor has been supportive of this issue since he got elected like 2 years ago, talks about it constantly. There was a lot of momentum in the legislature. And let's be honest, the perfect way to deal with this is through the legislature. But instead of a constitutional amendment ballot initiative, but these legislators are not doing it. And so it's up to the people to finally do it. It has its own flaws, but would just love for you, there's talk about what's New Jersey going to do. They're so close in the legislature. The governor wants to go forward. How does the politics play in New Jersey? The elections next week, lame duck sessions. What's going on in New Jersey that could change anything, or what's going on with the politics around this issue?
That's a great question, Michael. Thank you. And Stacey, this is why these calls are so great, because I've been following, and I didn't realize that your work included the expungement and sort of that process. So even I'm learning things about these other ballot initiatives in other states. So that's just awesome for me. But to your question, Michael, I think you're right. Governor Murphy ran on this issue when he ran for the seat in 2017, promised that he would get it done in the first 100 days, when he sort of got into the administration in 18. And yet here we are doing a constitutional amendment. I think what kind of came up is oftentimes what you see in many state legislatures is a risk-adverse risk-adverse legislators who want to see the electorate give them the signal that this is okay. Now, polling for legalized adult use cannabis in New Jersey has historically been high. And I think to the earlier comment, right, as we've seen the rest of the world do this and the sky hasn't fallen, it has only increased. I think what happened is we sort of got to a stalemate in the legislature, and you had a couple of folks who had just sort of dug their feet in pretty deeply. And New Jersey, unfortunately, is one of these states that it doesn't really matter, who's in charge. We're a pretty purple state when it comes to our state body makeup, right? We go blue in the big presidential years, but our Democrats love to fight with each other in the state legislature. So we saw this when we had a Republican governor, but we actually see it even more now with a Democratic governor, that the legislature, even though they're all blue and you think this would be the sort of like easy breezy dynamic, unfortunately in the Northeast and in New Jersey, that doesn't always play out that way. And I think you're seeing that in a bunch of different states where you've got a governor and a legislature who should be aligned and should find common ground, and they just can't get there. So what will happen in New Jersey is The ballot question is the constitutional amendment. The sort of nuts and bolts of what happens and how this all gets executed still goes right back to the legislature and to a new commission that was founded through legislation in 2019 called the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. So it's kind of like a pass, but then it comes right back to them anyway. It's a confusing process here.
So we talked about 3 of the states that have initiatives. There's 5. We've already gone over Montana, Arizona, New Jersey. So we've got Mississippi last and South Dakota. So Matt, I'm going to loop back to you in a second to give us some context for South Dakota. Unfortunately, things are very heated down in Mississippi, as they are for all of you guys too. Everyone's really busy ahead of election day. So unfortunately, we weren't able to have a guest on today to talk about Mississippi. So I am our unofficial Mississippi surrogate today for them. And so want to let all of our viewers know that there is a ballot initiative to legalize medical cannabis in Mississippi. I should say there are 2 ballot initiatives to legalize medical cannabis in Mississippi. And yes, you heard that right. I did say Mississippi, the Deep South state that all of you are like, what? You're telling me they're going to legalize medical marijuana in Mississippi? Yes, that is the hope. So down in Mississippi, they have 2 ballot initiatives. Like I mentioned, there's Amendment 65 and Amendment 65A. Very easy to tell them apart. The Mississippi ballot, I have to say, it's confusing even for somebody who would consider themselves a policy wonk. So we have Amendment 65 and Amendment 65A. Initiative 65 and 65A. Initiative 65 is more of a citizen-driven initiative, right, Matt? Am I sort of characterizing that correctly? I know you guys have been involved in Mississippi, whereas Initiative 65A was put on by the legislature, right?
Correct.
And so, you know, Initiative 65, the citizen and MPP-backed initiative, and the one that we are hopeful will pass, is actually relatively business friendly. It seems like this initiative wouldn't limit the number of medical marijuana licenses in the state, has a relatively low tax rate compared to some other states. It looks like around, I think it's 7% or so. And we want to make sure that that's competitive, you know, with the illicit market. So important as we think about the long-term effects of these initiatives. But then we have Initiative 65A, and remember that's the legislature pushed one much more restrictive. That would limit medical cannabis in its smokable form only to terminally ill patients, whereas the other initiative has, I think, about 20 qualifying conditions. So Mississippi citizens are going to have to go, and they have these 2 initiatives for medical marijuana on the ballot. But then they also have to answer, and I alluded to this earlier, I hope you guys can see my screen here. They also have to answer whether or not they intend to vote yes on either of them. So you have to first say, yeah, I intend to vote yes on one of the medical marijuana initiatives. And then you actually have to go down and choose which one it is you're going to vote on. And then the real kicker, as if that wasn't enough, is that either of those initiatives has to get at least 40% of the vote to pass. So it is a very nuanced process there in Mississippi. I think, again, thinking about this under the lens of COVID, definitely have their work cut out for them. But Matt, would love to hear if you have anything to add about Mississippi. I know this has sort of been a long time coming, and you know more about it than me.
Sure. I'll just give a little backstory on why there's a quick backstory on why there's 2 initiatives. The Citizens Initiative, which is 65, completed its signature drive, went before the legislature as is often required under State Ballot Initiative rules, and the legislature chose to place an alternative alongside it on the ballot. And in doing so, they created confusion because, as you pointed out, is now a 2-step process. First, you have to vote for some type of medical marijuana, and then you have to choose between the 2. The more steps to a process, the more things can go wrong. So to me, it's pretty clear that the legislature doesn't want anything to pass, and that the only tool they had left in their toolbox was to create this alternative that has no actual details, that leaves all implementation up to the legislature, which is exactly what the case was before. Legislatures asking the people of Mississippi to direct it to do something that it could have done for many years. So to me, it's a disingenuous ballot initiative, and I believe that the Mississippi campaign is running a hell of a campaign, and that they're going to prevail in difficult circumstances. But it is unfortunate to see a legislature do that.
And just to piggyback on back of what Matt was saying, I was able to speak to some of the organizers of the initiative last year. They have a really great campaign. It's a Republican legislator in the state. They have a lot of money. They built up a wonderful case. The polling, I'm looking at the polling, I have it right here. They asked the support in Mississippi, and you have to remember, like, the 3 or 4 truly Republican states across the board, Mississippi is one of them. And the support is strongly favor or somewhat favor is 77% in Mississippi, somewhat opposed or strongly opposed 20%. The support is there. If it were just left to the voters to decide, it'll win, and it would win overwhelmingly. But like Matt said, this should be done through the legislature. It isn't. They went to a ballot initiative, and then conservative reactionary prohibitionists in the legislature did not like what was going to happen. And as Matt said, are just putting up roadblocks. And they're trying to say, whoa, this shouldn't be a constitutional amendment. The legislature should do this, when they had every opportunity for years to do this, and they didn't. And so now, when you can't beat them, just try to confuse them and put up as many roadblocks as possible to voting. So the numbers are there. I'm really curious how this plays out and how truly smart voters are, or whether they just say, you know what, this is too much to think about. You get the little old lady that says, I don't want to deal with this, and says no. But the numbers are there. I hope it wins. Mississippi, I mean, I don't count Florida as the South. Louisiana has a messed up one. Arkansas maybe. So there aren't truly a lot of southern states that have anything working. This could actually be a good working program in Mississippi. So fingers crossed.
Well, and I think it's really indicative too of something that we're seeing from prohibitionists across the board, right? Like, we've seen now over the years that fear mongering didn't work, right? Gateway theory, your kids are all going to be hooked. They're putting edibles in the Halloween candy. Like, that stuff didn't work. And so I think it's interesting, as this issue continues to evolve and we get further down the road, now it's turning into, I think I just read a town or a city, I think it's Madison, in Mississippi, is trying to sue the state over the ballot initiative because over a signature thing. We saw that in Montana, that they tried to take this to the courts there and get it thrown out. We saw it in Nebraska. Unfortunately, their ballot initiatives are not on the ballot this year. They're going to have to wait until another election cycle. So I think it's really interesting. We're kind of seeing the prohibitionists. I don't want to say like get smarter. I think that they're not. Well, get smarter and start using, I guess, some of the other tools in their arsenal other than fear mongering, like the courts and whatnot. So.
I just have to say that would be some expensive Halloween candy, Michelle, if they started putting edibles in there.
Please, I will trick or treat.
Where's that Halloween candy? I want some of that Halloween candy.
So
I think that
go ahead, Matt.
They are using these tactics. They're getting lucky. They got lucky in the Nebraska Supreme Court. And they didn't deserve to win that. And they're not going to win this in Mississippi, and their lawsuit in Montana is completely frivolous. And they're just getting desperate. Medical marijuana can pass in every state in the country. I was involved in the Utah campaign in 2018, and I said at the time, if you could do it in Utah, you can do it anywhere. And so they've just basically given up on medical, and their new position on legalization is decrim's good. Well, what are the details? Oh, we'd rather not tell you what the details are of our decrim policy. Okay, well, fine. We're just going to make the case for legal.
It's a moving target for prohibitionists, because 8 years ago, it's like the sky is falling in Colorado. Now we've had 8 years of data, and the world didn't end, And every little issue that comes up with cannabis legalization, you can address it as a policy issue. And if you're worried about teen use, address it as teen use. Cigarette use went down, not because we didn't make it illegal, but because we educated people. DUID, other things, you address it as a policy issue, you educate, you tax, you regulate, and you can get a good outcome. But 2 years ago, NCIA sponsored an event out in Vegas where we had state legislators there. And we had them all day. We did a policy summit with state legislators around the country. We had them tour a testing facility, a cultivation facility, and a dispensary. And I had legislators from Louisiana, Wisconsin, South Dakota, other states, and you could just see their eyes get big. Once legislators see what a legal cannabis industry looks like, and it isn't like the Cheech and Chong in your basement blowing up your basement, then they're more willing to have that in their backyard. And I mentioned, because there was a state legislator from South Dakota on this tour, and I see South Dakota is doing something. So Matt, I don't know if you are working on what's going on in South Dakota, if you can talk about that issue.
Yeah, sorry I keep talking so much. I wish I could work on just one state. That sounds nice, actually. But South Dakota is a wonderful campaign. I've really enjoyed working in South Dakota. And we're doing something historic. We're trying to pass medical and recreational at the same time on the same ballot, 2 different initiatives. The last time that was attempted was Ohio in 2015, which did both policies in one initiative. That initiative failed because it had a constitutionally enshrined oligopoly written into it. But South Dakota is a really good approach, conservative approach to marijuana. And we're feeling good about passing MMA and Measure 26. And I think if we win in South Dakota, this becomes, not only do we get these 2 victories in one night for the first time, but it'll be the most conservative state in the country to legalize marijuana. I think it'll send a message to other states and hopefully fuel our momentum at the federal level, which is your guys' area of expertise.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It's so fun, like Mike was saying at the top of this webinar, about how, it's sort of a funnel up and how it impacts our work. And it's, like I said, so exciting that we have states like South Dakota and Mississippi. Like, I think South Dakota only has 1 representative in the House, but still, so it's not going to tip the scales in terms of a vote. But again, I think that the narrative is the big thing here. So I'm excited for that one too. Speaking of which, Jackie, let's go back to you. Let's talk some more about New Jersey. Kind of almost seems like a foregone conclusion that the initiative is going to pass, right? Like you mentioned earlier, it's an incredibly popular issue. It's been socialized sort of for years, with the governor talking about it, the legislature talking about it. It's been in the news. So, is it a foregone conclusion at this point that the initiative is going to pass? What are you guys hearing from any opposition?
I mean, I think with anything, there's always opposition that kind of rears its ugly head in these final days of the campaign. And it's no surprise that there's folks kind of throwing out different landmines and sort of different things here. I remain a sort of cautious optimist. I think that's sort of in my wiring. You don't work in policy if you're not, that we will get it done. My concern really kind of comes back to, all right, if we've got 68% of the state at most recent polling saying yes, even assuming there's flake rate on the ballot questions, which just happened by design, right? It would happen even if we were voting in person. People don't go all the way down to the bottom to do the ballot questions. I remain optimistic that we'll get over the threshold. My worry is that we come back to the same sort of, stalemates in the legislature on the nuts and bolts of getting this done. Because what happens if you've got a member who says, in my district, this was only 51%, or in my district, it didn't go, right? The state might have won it, but for me, it might not have. My concern is, the more we see other states kind of move ahead, the rippling effect of not only the potential of an adult use market, but sort of the stagnation of the medicinal market, right? Because in many states, these now become kind of interwoven together. And while I have full faith, I worked at the Department of Health, I regulated the New Jersey market at one point, and the staff there, I worry that the political climate says, let's not touch anything going on with medicinal until we figure this adult use market out. If that takes a whole nother year to sort of manifest, yes, it stymies the growth of the new adult use market, but what happens in New Jersey? There's 92,000 patients, right, that depend on this cannabis for their medicine. And I think a lot of them feel like the collective arms are tied because all eyes are on adult use. So my concern isn't as much about what goes on Tuesday. Again, cautious optimism, turn the page over, return those vote by mail ballots. But how do we ensure that patients continue to get the medicine that they need, that the medicinal program doesn't kind of sort of get stuck in this limbo situation as we wait for adult use to get its act together. And I hope the legislature kind of, works on it and pushes forward to be impactful.
No, I couldn't agree more. And you're talking about the politics. It's always about the politics. And I always say, I've said this for years, that Congress lags public opinion by 3 to 5 years. I think I have to move that back to 5 to 10 years, because I've been at this for 8 years and I thought they would have been catching up a little more. But I want to talk about politics in New Jersey. So Congressman Frank Pallone is from New Jersey. He's chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, probably one of the most powerful committees in Congress in the House. When you talk about energy and commerce and cannabis, it would be about regulations and how we regulate the industry. You know, for many years, me doing my job, it was the giggle factor of should we even be legalizing? Should we be doing? You know, the discussion when I started in 2013, before any legal sales had ever happened, was a little different than me in 2020 or me 2021. And now the discussion is, okay, we're into legalization, but how do we do this in regulations? So making sure New Jersey does this right. So Frank Pallone has a very good view of cannabis legalization in his state, of wanting to take that and having a positive thought on that. There's that aspect. And then the second, this is a little curiosity. So there's a congressman, Jeff Van Drew, I think the 2nd district. He was a Democrat, got elected in 2018, then switched over to Republicans and became a full Trumper. And now the Democrats are running against him. You know, it tends to be I guess a purple district. You would know better, but he's running against Amy Kennedy, a Kennedy family name, who is married to Patrick Kennedy, who is Project Sam, our biggest opponents of marijuana, smart approaches to marijuana. So it's funny little element. It's the bullshit I get to deal with in DC. And so just love to hear, you know, just your thoughts on Jersey and politics and sort of those little things going on.
Yeah. I'll take the first one first. So I think, yes, obviously making sure that Frank Pallone sees this well. ENC will play a role in this. But let's not forget, you know, New Jersey sits right next to PA, right? 50% of the state of Pennsylvania's population is within 30 to 45 minutes of the border of New Jersey, right? We've got all of New York. And New Jersey doesn't have our own media market. We have tiny little syndicates here and there that do like teeny tiny local news, but our entire state is covered by the Philadelphia and the New York City media markets. So the coverage that comes out of what happens in New Jersey quickly becomes the New York City coverage, which in turn becomes the national conversation, right? So the New Jersey sort of process, because of the proximity to the New York market and how the New York market inevitably becomes a big part, just like LA, right, becomes a part of the sort of national churn and the national discussion, I think is going to be really huge. So it's not just Frank Pallone, although I love him, but it's thinking about how does this play into the media, right? Because the media and the stigma around cannabis, I think we know is probably our biggest, our real foe, right? It's not the realities, it's the interpretation or the sort of mysticism around the you know, reefer madness and the like. The other thing I think a lot of people have been pushing, I had the pleasure of serving in the Obama administration and realizing that, you know, let's just say we have a different presidential administration, but we don't take the Senate and we're stuck with this sort of stalemate in Congress, but a willing and interested administration in the White House. One of the things I've been encouraging folks to do is to think beyond congressional action. What authorities do the departments have through executive power, through memos? You know, we hear all the time that hospitals and health systems are scared to do research, not because they don't want to do it, not because they don't have physicians eager to, you know, make a name for themselves. It's because they risk Medicaid and Medicare funding or the threat of losing it. That could be something done through a memo, right, out of Health and Human Services. So I just keep encouraging folks, yes, Congress, no doubt, if we want big, broad brushstrokes, sure. But there's a lot of incremental work that can happen through the executive office. To get to the politics, you know, South Jersey is complicated even to those of us who've been working in it for a long time. We've seen Republicans across the country sort of say, wait a second, when it comes to some of the policies and work of the president, and to see, you know, Congressman Van Drew do the exact opposite and do an about face and run into the president with open arms has been comical and sad all at the same time. I think, you know, One of the things that tends to happen in the South is that because they are more rural, less densely populated regions, they don't sort of have the political gravitas that some of the other members get. You know, we've got some folks over the years who have held, they have now been run out of Congress, but who held pretty high-ranking seats, Lobiondo and others. You mentioned Pallone already. So, you know, a lot remains to be seen. The South has always been the purplest part of our state. There are red districts. And up until the midterms in 18, we had a split congressional delegation, right? It wasn't until the 18 midterms that we went totally top heavy and are now a 10-to-1 delegation. So New Jersey gets this sort of benchmark as a blue state, but it's not really, and it never really has been that deeply blue. Our presidential races are blue, but everything else is sort of a wash here.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point that I just wanted to mention. You know, this is going to take years for cannabis legalization at the federal level. To get involved with politics is what I do. You know, in 2016, Trump said not bad things on the campaign trail, but he appointed probably the two worst attorneys general that you could possibly appoint for our issue. The actions are what's important. Yeah, has he raided cannabis, but he hasn't made life easier. And Attorney General Barr has actually gone out of his way to make it harder behind the scenes. So on that, you look at, okay, how's Biden's view? Okay, he's an older guy, maybe he's not totally evolved, but I will take a Biden administration, fill that with more evolved people than a Trump DOJ or a Trump whatever. And the reason why I say that is because through executive action, you can do a lot of things. Treasury can clarify the banking rules. Veterans Affairs can clarify how they deal with vets. The IRS can make it a little better dealing with the tax issue. NIDA, there's so many on the research angle. There are so many things they can do outside of Congress's authority to make it a lot easier for states to go forward, make it a lot easier for patients. So that's something I've been thinking about going into 2021 of what we can be magnifying to say, hey, what can the government be doing outside of congressional action? So I just want to thank you for pointing that out. And just wanted to say that, Michelle, if you want to, I think we're getting towards the end. Now we have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're not totally there yet, but I do want to remind any of our viewers that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat box, the Q&A board. We'll get to it either way. And that being said, we had 2 questions come in so far, and Matt did a great job of answering them in the chat box, but I would love to hear the perspective of all of you. So I'm going to combine the 2 questions. And Stacey, I want you to start us off with them. So Ruth asked us, kind of about the varying tax rates that we're seeing. I had mentioned Mississippi had a relatively low one at around 7%. Matt dropped in, Montana is going to be 20%. South Dakota is 15% plus the state's 4.5% sales tax. I think Arizona's is similar to that. I know I'll let you talk about that. But so first off, let's talk about the tax rates. How did we get there? Do we anticipate that these are competitive? Like I mentioned earlier with the illicit market, what could the effects of that be? And then sort of related, we had a question from Bo about cannabis solving states' budget issues. And this is a really, really hot topic right now with COVID. Matt mentioned in the chat feature, we're all careful not to overpromise. And I think that's been key. But I also don't think anybody is turning their noses up at millions of dollars, even if it is, Bo mentions only 0.3% of the state revenue in Oregon. Hey, millions of dollars during the pandemic. I don't know. I'm not turning my nose up at it. I know those are similar conversations they're having in places like New York, next to New Jersey. So I want to stop there. So Stacey, let's start with you though. Talk to us. How did we get to this tax rate? Was this modeled off of another state? And what do we think the budget implications could be?
So we were trying to find that sweet spot. I think that every policymaker in the cannabis space is trying to figure out is where that sweet spot is. We've got the excise tax at 16% plus the local and state taxes. So a total rate, depending on which city you're in, of about 22, 24% ish. Ideally, that'll be, and certainly we've allowed for in this in this initiative, we've got a Voter Protection Act that keeps the legislature from tinkering with initiatives that pass, but it furthers the purpose. We define it as furthering the purpose if the legislature wants to lower the rate. One of the big attacks that Matt had to deal with in 2016 is whether or not, and there was funding that was dedicated to K-12 education, whether or not that was enough, whether or not it was going to make to classrooms. They had superintendents from Colorado saying, or principals from Colorado saying, we never saw this money, don't be fooled. We stayed out of the K-12 fight knowing that there was going to be a K-12 education funding initiative on this ballot. And Arizona has the worst, one of the 48th, 49th, 50th, depending on what you ask, who you ask, the worst funded education, K-12 education system in the country. And so our economist predicts there's about $300 million in new revenue to the state of Arizona. The K-12 education funding crisis is a $1.5 billion problem. And so we avoided actually dedicating revenue to the K-12 system because we can't put $300 million in a $1.5 billion hole and expect it to solve problems. And we would have just been defending that. We would have had two K-12 education funding issues then on the ballot. We thought it was going to complicate things quite a bit. So we dedicated revenue to the community college system, which in Arizona is extraordinarily important. And it solves that issue. It restores funding back to pre-2008 recession levels, which Arizona has not done. None of our education from K-12 to community colleges to universities, none of the funding's been restored from the 2008 recession cuts. So so that's really it. We kind of fiddled around with the funding system and tried to get that sweet spot in the excise tax.
Matt, you're a pro on this stuff. Talk to us. Talk about the tax rates. You mentioned in the chat box that you guys are kind of stick around 20% as sort of your comfort range. How did you get to that?
Well, in Montana, the tax rate's simple sales tax, 20%. And in South Dakota, it's 15% plus the 4.5% state sales tax. Those are competitive with other states. Looking at, Alaska, Maine, Oregon, all of them are in the low 20s. We felt that in conservative, low tax states, it was important to be able to say to voters, these have lower tax rates or some of the lowest tax rates of any initiatives out there. In terms of revenue estimates, in South Dakota, a conservative estimate puts it at $250 million over the next 10 years. I think that's a very conservative estimate, but comes straight from the state, and voters are excited about that. Half the money goes to public schools, and another state with very poorly funded public schools. So we're glad that we could do that, but totally understand the Arizona approach going to the community colleges. That's a great idea. Montana, the initiatives are expected to generate $236 million in new tax revenue over the next 6 years. Again, I think that's a conservative estimate. And our opponents say lots of stupid and annoying things, but I think the one that is like top 3 most annoying is when they list states with budget deficits and say they've legalized marijuana. It's like nobody ever said that legalization was going to eliminate budget deficits. There are a multitude of factors that dictate the fiscal health of your state, and the correlation that you're attempting to draw here is ridiculous. No sales tax, no tax based on the sale of a product is ever going to fix a state's fiscal situation. There is no product that's consumed widely enough that you could tax enough. So it's always just going to be part of the solution. And what I like to say is that, there's in South Dakota, there's 250 million reasons why your taxes won't need to go up for other reasons. And we're going to be using the money for good projects. So, just don't overpromise. Be straight up with voters. Voters like the revenue. We've seen that in poll after poll after poll in every single state. They're excited about the idea of generating revenue. Just don't oversell it. And it's something that voters will consider and they'll see as a positive reason to vote for these types of initiatives.
And I think if I could just jump in really quick. So in New Jersey, I shared with Brian and he shared with the group, there was a report that was done in 2016 that made a projection. New Jersey in the current ballot question has it set at the state sales tax, but then allows for municipal tax on top of that, which is enticing some communities to take this on as a way to fill the COVID holes that have been created. But it isn't just about money brought in. It's also about money saved. And so when we look at the price and the cost of arrests, incarceration, et cetera, those are ways that we can sort of pivot to say, look, this is not just about a cold, hard dollar brought into the state budget. I couldn't agree with that more, that there's literally nothing. You'd have to do gasoline, caffeine, everything, right, to fill the state budget holes, especially this year. But it's also about where the rest of the money goes. And so if municipalities, counties, and the state are not dealing with drug offenses in the same way, you know, it's much more than just what comes in. It's also where we wind up spending our dollars and our resources, right? You know, the case in Philadelphia this week alone illustrates that putting more into social services, into mental health supports, and other things in our communities can prevent both like a lost life, which is the immediate concern, but also like, how do we get to the place we want to be, right? Like, let's fund drug courts, right? So I think that we can really try to push the dynamic and the dialogue away from what's the amount on a spreadsheet that comes in, and how do we redistribute the funds that we save by doing things smarter and more humanely to the people who, I think, you know, Stacey said this at the beginning of the call, getting rid of cannabis is not an option, right? Yeah. It's what we do with the cannabis that's already being used in the illicit market, and how do we reallocate the funds that are spent on that illicit market as we also build and grow mature adult use markets.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what everyone said. Is it's not only, I mean, the revenue's great. State legislators look at it. It's good to be able to fund education or roads or do whatever. But the intended goal, the end goal of all of this legalization is to make the illicit market slowly go away. And I do get worried. You see this in some states, that politicians want to tax the golden goose. They just look at this as this endless amount of money that they can tax the shit at us, pardon my French, and they don't care. And what happens, you see this in Washington State, you see it in California, that the illicit market isn't really going away because people will pay a premium for a legal, to be able to go down the street and get their legal substance. But if it is so great, the price difference is so great that you're just gonna be comfortable and go to the guy you were getting the cannabis for down the street because it is such a price difference. And so we need to make sure that there is that sweet spot of what the tax rate should be to achieve the intended outcome that you want to achieve, which is getting rid of the illicit market. And it shouldn't be generating revenue. Generating revenue should be an icing on the cake, but there should be so many other policy objectives you're trying to achieve with legalization. So I just want to throw that out there, get off the soapbox, and send it back to Michelle.
Yeah, we're getting close to time here. So one more question before we go to closing thoughts from our amazing panelists today. We have one more question from Jacqueline, who is with the Cannabis Advisory Group, our amazing sponsor today. So want to make sure we mention them again. But she has a question for you, Stacey. She says, late last year, I read that Arizona has a medical marijuana fund, which was established for fees collected, civil penalties, etc. I'm wondering if it's working. Here in New Jersey, we're working towards how the funds are released to and where. So Stacey, how's that fund turning out in Arizona? Oh, hold on, you're on mute.
I'm muted. The Department of Health Services in Arizona has argued that it's not empowered to distribute the medical marijuana funds as voters intended when they passed medical marijuana in Arizona. So it's just sitting there. It's in a black hole. It's in a vault. Wow. There's nearly $100 million that DHS swears it cannot touch. In large part, we reallocate that with this initiative. So we put $15 million into the Arizona Teachers Academy to try to solve the teacher shortage crisis, which is an academy that gives future teachers free tuition. We reallocate some of those programs. There's lots of unfunded study groups through the state legislature, infant mortality being one, teen addiction prevention, all sorts of other things. So we move those monies around and clarify how DHS needs to distribute that going forward. So in theory, it's a great concept. In Arizona, it hasn't been executed particularly well.
And this funnily enough, this was the case 4 years ago when we were working on a campaign. This has been the same situation for 4 years, money piling up, and it's good that this initiative is going to address it and spend it.
Mike, you're muted, but while you unmute, I'll just say that I'm amazed that you guys have $100 million sitting there, and that you said that the education levels still aren't back from 2008. I'm just stunned at that. So Mike, turn it back to you before closing.
No matter how many of these Zoom webinars you do, you always forget the mute button in. So at least I didn't have a Jeffrey Toobin moment. Too soon?
Too soon.
One, I wanted to thank everybody for the wonderful discussion. I want to just tell the audience, these campaigns aren't cheap. The only way they get them past the finish line is if they get funding. I try to chip in a couple bucks for every campaign I can. So one, look at it, throw some money to these people. It's very important for the end goal of what we're trying to achieve. And so one, thank you guys. And Michelle, if you want to close this down.
No, I just would love to get closing thoughts from you guys. We can't say thank you enough. We know this is such a critical time for all of you. So I'm just going to go down in the order I see. I see Matt, you're unmuted. So any closing thoughts other than vote and donate?
I think that there's really good reason to think that we can finally achieve federal reform next year. And I've been one of the people that's been constantly pessimistic, constantly saying it can't happen, whether it was after the 2018 election or after the 2016 election. This time I feel differently. Look at the states we're operating in. It's such a diverse set of states. You've got blue New Jersey, deep red Mississippi, deep red South Dakota, longtime purple Montana, newly found purple Arizona. You get the whole cross section from the Grand Canyon to the Badlands to the Jersey Shore. So it's a real cross section of America, and it's going to send a really powerful message to Congress that no matter what party you're in, it's time to deal with this and time to respect the will of the American people. So I just hope that after we win all 5 of these states and my peers here are successful as well, that we can go into 2021 and finally get the reform that the American people are demanding.
Amen.
I love that saying, Matt. I think that's amazing. Grand Canyon to the Badlands to the Jersey Shore. So hey, to the Jersey Shore, Jackie, closing thoughts?
I'm gonna have to just piggyback on Matt. I think that this is, we saw this with marriage equality. We've seen this with a bunch of other controversial issues, that the states come in and say, hold up, let's get this right. And if we have success in these 5 states, which are as diverse as Matt articulated, I think it only sets the table for the federal government to do what it needs to do and to hear the will of the people. And I think that it's high time, no pun intended, that we start to think creatively beyond just Congress. We could have a 4-day long webinar on the gridlock and the sort of political environment in Washington, D.C. But we need to work with what we've got and stop complaining if we can't get it done the way we've been trying, and come up with new ways to do that. And hopefully through executive action and administrative ways, we can do that with a new person in the White House.
I'm loving the optimism. Okay, Stacey, closing thoughts from you?
Yeah, I just am so appreciative of the work that has been done in states prior to Arizona and all of the work that you folks have done in passing pioneering legislation and then revising it and revisiting it and improving it. And, expungement wasn't something that Arizonans cared about or would have supported 4 years ago. And the fact that we went from tent city in 2016 to 200,000 people and potential expungements is extraordinary. And it's from the good work that all of you have done on this webinar and folks that have been in this policy arena far longer than I have. So thank you.
No, thank all of you again for being here, for the work you're doing. I think that it's not lost on any of us that we all stand on the shoulders of both advocates who came before us, people affected by the war on drugs who came before us. So I think it's so critical that we keep that front of mind. The last closing thought I will say to anybody who is listening to this ahead of Election Day, make sure you're registered to vote. One of my favorite places online to go to see if you're registered, learn how to get registered, create a voting plan is votesaveamerica.com. That's just one of my personal favorites. I think it's a really good one-stop shop, but just remember to vote, do it safely, do it ahead of time. If you can, like we said, get active. donate to these campaigns if you can. We're so appreciative for all of the work that Matt, Jackie, Stacy, your teams are all doing on the ground. And me and Mike are looking forward to the repercussions, or I should say the wonderful effects that are going to happen for us here in DC as a result of all your guys' hard work. So with that, get out, vote, and I'm turning it back to Brian to close us out.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I couldn't echo those sentiments any harder. Thank you so much to Matthew, Jackie, and Stacy for joining us this afternoon for our monthly members-only Fireside Chat with our GR team, Mike and Michelle. Huge shout out to Mike and Michelle, as always, for leading and facilitating that fantastic conversation. Why don't we give a big virtual round of applause for all of our panelists. Once you raise your hand in the audience pool and let our great panelists know that you've got a ton of great information to take with you to the ballot box. Awesome. Perfect. Well, as always, we want to leave you all with a preview of some upcoming sessions that we have underneath of our Industry Essentials umbrella while all of our speakers leave the virtual stage. So stick around for the next few minutes while we give you a quick preview of those upcoming sessions. And as always, leave you with a member appreciation credit sequence. All right, next up later this afternoon, we have another edition of our Service Solution series, which allows business owners the opportunity to learn more about premier products, services, and industry solutions directly from our network of established suppliers, providers, and thought leaders, which make up NCIA's membership base. You won't want to miss this session, as we'll be hosting a very enlightening conversation in which Cannabis Media discusses their recent research reports, the cannabis software stack, alongside the point of sale software in the cannabis industry 2020 report. This session will analyze the market share of point of sale software platforms used by cannabis dispensaries and retailers across the United States and dig into trends discovered since the 2018 report. As always, our Service Solution series is open and free to the public, so please register today at our website, then invite as many of your industry colleagues or coworkers who might be interested in attending as well. And as you'll see there, it does kick off in just under 2 hours at 3 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. A huge thank you again to our panelists, participants, and audience members, which make our work possible each and every day. Special thanks once again to the Cannabis Advisory Group for supporting this session via sponsorship and participation in the panel. Don't forget to complete the attendee survey after leaving the meeting room to gain immediate access to our presentation, and then stay on a lookout for a formatted video recording to be posted on our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect, in the coming days. For all of you NCIA members in the room as well, you'll note that all of the recent Cannabis Caucus cyber events that took place across last month have just been posted in NCIA Connect as well, and feature some really fantastic organizational and regional policy updates for you to dive into. And then one additional note on the formatted video recording: all NCIA members will receive exclusive access to this session for the next 30 days. So if you have any colleagues, coworkers that are not members, do consider asking them to join to support our vital advocacy and educational and community building efforts. We'll leave you all, as always, with this end of event credit sequence, highlighting all the 40+ member businesses which make up NCIA's board of directors and policy council, as well as the few dozen member businesses that participated in today's session. Alongside, we're going to feature some audio stylings by resident musician at our Colorado-based events, KJ Liss. And if you like what you heard, definitely head over to NCIA Connect to view his full 3-hour sets that he performed during all of our happy half hours as part of those Cannabis Caucus cyber events last month as well. And with that, enjoy, and we'll see you all at another NCIA virtual event soon. Don't forget to mark your calendars for the Cannabis Business Cyber Summit, kicking off November 10th and running through November 12th. All NCIA members receive free admission. So head to cannabisbusinesssummit.com to secure those passes today, and we'll see you there. Thank you all again. See you next time.